The headlines are loud and the markets are doing crazy things, and you probably want to do something, anything, but should you? This week on The Roth Guy, let's talk about things to do when the market actually drops.
Flying high above the metropolis, it's The Roth Guy with holistic wealth advisor Jude Wilson.
Hey everybody, welcome into the podcast. Thanks for hanging out with Jude Wilson and myself here on The Roth Guy. Welcome in, Roth Guy. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing excellent, man. I feel good. Even though the Rockets are rocky, I feel great.
Yeah, it's a little choppy,
Just a little
bit. So we thought, well, you know what? Let's talk about it. I know you've been sending some things out to clients and whatnot, and I asked this question to all the advisors that I talk to all across the country all the time. So I'm gonna start this conversation the same way with you, but I will let the listeners know. So we got 4 items this week. We're just going to kind of share things to maybe do if you're feeling a little out there about some of this stuff. So we're going to go through a couple things for you to think about. But let me start by asking this question, Jude.
Sure.
How many of your existing current clients that already work with you are calling during this kind of volatility? Most of the people I talk to say it's just a few nervous Nellies, not many. Is that the same?
That is the most appropriate question. You're right. For us, my family members know what I do for a living. So I've been getting calls from them. Jude, are you okay? I'm fine.
Right.
Our clients, I think we've probably over the last 2 weeks answered maybe 4 or 5 calls from people who are a little
That's
bit
not
nervous.
bad.
Yeah. And it stems from what we're going to talk about today, really having a plan and understanding that that plan is customized to you and your situation.
Yeah. I'll give you a great example of that. I was just talking with another colleague, or I think it was 2 days ago. Either way, it was a client of his was calling every day last week when it kind of really started ramping up, right? When Kramer was saying, we're going to have a Black Monday, and we didn't have that. But he said she called like 4 or 5 times, and they got back with her over the course of 2 days or something. And she's like, I can't take it. The news says the S&P is down 15%. At the time, it was had fallen 15%. This was before, I think, the first pause conversation, right, and before it shot back up a little bit. And anyway, he says, okay, fine, let's talk through it. And he said, well, first of all, why are you panicking? She's like, because I'm down 15%. And he goes, okay, if you were 100% in the S&P, then you would be correct. But we don't have you that way. And that's the same kind of thing, right? People see the headlines and they think this is exactly, and so they went through her process and she was down 2%,
Yeah.
Big difference.
And it is, I tell this to the young advisors that I train. Financial planning is both about the math and science, but it's also about the psychology and the emotion.
Yeah.
If you're watching the news and you're seeing that everything is in red and the newscasters are talking about it's Black Monday and this is the worst one day drop this year, of course, you're going to get emotional.
Yeah.
And as advisors, we have to have a level of empathy when we're talking to our clients, just like the colleague that you talked to before, and walk them through it, because we can't just say, look, that's the market. It's 15%.
It'll come back.
It'll come back. People want to know, what should I do now? That's why I'm so glad we're having this conversation today.
Well, yeah, let's jump into it. So the first piece, gut check, right? So when's the last time you checked it? Because if you are panicking, let's be honest, this shouldn't have come as a surprise. All right. This administration has been ran on the fact that this was going to be, tariffs were going to be put into place. So if you did not bother to gut check and recheck your plan a little bit, because the last 2 years, Jude, 22% up, right, in the S&P. So if you just kind of left it status quo, maybe you shouldn't have done that, right? Maybe you should have kind of have your eyes on it a little bit. And again, that's what you do as advisors for your clients. But for people who are DIYing it or whatever the case is, they weren't doing this.
Exactly. So I don't know what percentage of Americans are DIY type of people versus people who see an advisor. But I would tell you, this all starts well before any discussion of the administration had about tariffs. It really starts with the basics. And I know most people don't want to hear that, but it really does start with having a financial plan and a direction. Because if you just start moving north, that's not a plan.
Hmm.
You've got a GPS for a reason, and having a plan gives you the understanding about what to do when things hit the fan,
Yeah.
or whether you should even do anything,
Right.
because it's been well thought out prior to these things. And these things are going to constantly happen.
Yeah. So that, like that story I shared, gut check it, because you're probably not down 15% or
Right.
10% or whatever the number happens to be, because you probably weren't 100% in whatever, indice you're looking at that particular
Right.
day, especially if you're working with a financial professional. Now, again, if you're DIYing it and you've got, everything you've got, something like that, well, then sure, that's going to be a different animal. But that's why you need a gut check and to go get a strategy, go get a plan, sit down with an advisor and say, hey, let's run some numbers and see where we're at. I was just looking at my own personal, the account that I kind of play around with just before we jumped on. And it was like, okay, it's not as bad as I thought, because
Right.
I also have some diversification, which we're going to talk about next, right? Which is getting real with your risk tolerance. And I've been saying this, Jude, and tell me what you think about this. I feel like this whole thing that's happening right now is really kind of a love letter, if you will, for or lack of a better term, to proper diversification, because you got emerging markets doing well, but then you have the certain indices not. So it's like, this is why you need your risk analysis done. This is why you need proper diversification, because when some things are down, some things are up.
100%. And we've talked about this on the channel several times before. Our number one philosophy is the bucket plan, dividing your money between now, soon, and later.
Mm-hmm.
Each bucket has a purpose. Each bucket has a particular rate of return that we're trying to achieve, and a time frame for that. And so many other people have different strategies as far as diversification. But when I've talked to particularly people who've called me who weren't clients, said, Jude, I've been meaning to call you, and now this thing is happening, and I really want to talk to you. The first question I ask them is, when have you ever sat down and put together a plan to diversify your assets?
Right.
And I can tell you 99% of the time that question is no. Because
Right.
I've talked to people over the last 2 weeks who have been on each side of the barbell. I've talked to people who said, you know what, Jude, I'm worried, but I'm so glad that all of my assets are at the bank and in the savings account or money market. And I think to myself, of course, I don't want to say this to them, but I think to myself, oh my God, the last 2 years, you missed one of the best bull markets.
Right.
And then I've talked to people who have been on the other side of the barbell, a new prospect that had contacted us, and 100% of his 401k and investment accounts were in between the S&P and the Magnificent Seven.
Mm-hmm.
So the last 2 years, he's done incredibly well.
And now
but
not
we're
so much.
panicking over the last 2 days when the tariffs were announced.
Yeah.
So I say all this to say, you have to have a well thought out diversification plan for yourself, whether it's our strategy using the buckets or something else that makes sense to you.
Well, so let's talk a little strategy here, Jude, because, we have to go silver lining on things. We have to find some ways because we can't control this stuff. And we've talked about it all the time. We can't control what administrations are going to do. We can't control what markets are going to do. We can't control. So you have to find the ways that you can work within, the chessboard, so to speak. Right. So are there some smart moves we could be making right now? So let's run through a couple of bullet points. What's the first one that jumps out at you as far as, look, we're in it, it's down. We don't know how long this is going to last. So what's some things to think about?
Well, I would divide it into maybe two categories, looking at money that's in tax sheltered accounts like your 401k and IRA, and looking at money that is not tax sheltered like a regular investment account.
Okay.
The reason being is that in your tax sheltered account, you can move things around without any fear of causing a taxable liability. Okay. So when we look at non tax sheltered accounts, you may want to look at your portfolio and see what are some of the things that you've had huge gains on, like that gentleman that I told you about who had most of his money between the S&P and the Magnificent Seven,
which is mostly the S&P.
Exactly, and I can tell you without even looking at his portfolio, he's probably got huge gains in those. And this may be the appropriate time to start thinking about rebalancing that portfolio because there's some gains that have actually come down, and this may be the most appropriate time to look at selling some of those assets and balancing into things that are out of favor, but could more than likely come back in favor.
So a little tax loss harvesting, not just as a year-end strategy, but doing it right now while we're experiencing, some volatility.
Exactly. And to reference, of course, I'm the Roth guy. To reference one of our previous shows, we talked about the Rocket Roth strategy. Mm-hmm. And that basically pertains to, you want to have your most aggressive investments in your Roth, because that's going to give you the highest probability for a very high return and growth of your money. Mm-hmm. The average portfolio is a 60-40, 60% equities, 40% fixed income.
Right.
But if you want to keep that same 60-40, maybe you should look at the Roth and have a majority of your equities in the Roth to give you the highest probability. Now's a good time to be looking at that strategy.
Well, okay, so let's talk about the Roth for a second, because that's appropriate with the chat. Because, okay, talking silver linings, markets are down. You've got your regular company sponsored 401k or whatever it is that you have. And again, what we talk about this week, folks, please don't go out and just do anything until you sit down and have a plan and a strategy put together. But let's say that, Roth conversions was on the radar for some of your strategy, right? So converting some of that traditional 401k. Well, silver lining, if the levels are down because the markets are down, if you do conversion, you're paying tax on a lower dollar amount, right?
Exactly.
So now's maybe a good time to re-talk to your advisor and say, hey, we had a strategy for conversions. Do we change it, or do we rev it up, or whatever, right?
100%. Because, the analogy I like to use is the stock market is like a man with a yo-yo in his hand walking up the hill.
Right.
The yo-yo is going to keep on going up and down, but your trajectory is going straight up the hill. And so now, while the yo-yo is down, this may be the most appropriate time to look at doing Roth conversions, because, I don't believe history actually repeats itself, but it sure does rhyme. Mm-hmm. And if it rhymes like the other times before, when we've had 9/11, 2008, COVID, then there's a very high likelihood that the market is going to come back. So if you're buying these particular investments at the low of the market or near the low, and it does come back, imagine what that's going to do for your Roth.
Yeah, I mean, historically, right, it does, right? I mean, and obviously the big question is always, what is your time horizon, right? If you're 70, you don't have the horizon to wait for it to come back if this thing gets prolonged. But let's be honest, to your point a little while ago, if you're doing a bucket strategy, even at 70, some of this money's still probably later. Because you're thinking you're going to live to, 80, 85, whatever the case is. You may not need it for several more years. So again, it's all a part of the strategy. And so those conversions could be important, because you're converting them now, you're paying a lower tax amount because A, we're historical tax lows. B, the market is down, so you're paying lower income. And then when it does come back, which it most likely will, as it usually does, now the money's growing tax free in the Roth, right? So silver lining.
100%. And the last thing that I'll say about silver lining is, when you have a well thought out financial plan, it's not just about the buckets. It's also about tax planning. We've talked on the show before about tax filter, pre-tax, post-tax, and tax advantage.
Yeah.
This should all be coordinated together to come out with the best probability, the best solution for the client, because not only are we talking about having our money in different buckets, but we're talking also about Roth conversion strategies and how much of your money should be aggressively invested in the Roth versus not.
Right.
This is for those that are do-it-yourselfers, great. For those of you that are seeing a financial advisor or tax professional, these are the type of questions that you should be asking, so you have a coordinated financial plan.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was funny because we got a message into the program, and it goes well with my point about, time to look for silver linings. And it was a person saying, hey, I'm a pre-retiree. I'm not retired yet. I'm still working. I'm still contributing. Should I scale back my contributions while the market's no. Right. So it's like, if you're still working, your dollar cost averaging, right, you should still be pumping in to your company sponsored plan, especially at least to get the matching money. I mean, that's just got to be a given. And it's funny how many times I see that question when markets are volatile. We saw it quite a bit back in 22 when it was real rocky for a few weeks. It's like, should I take advantage of dollar cost averaging, or should I pull back on contributing to my company sponsored plan? And it's like, no, you should keep contributing, especially if you're working, because you're buying. Jude, everybody loves if you're looking for a TV and it's 30% off, you're going to be interested in looking at some TVs. But when the market's 30% off, nobody wants to look at it, right? Nobody likes the stock market when it's on sale, which is fun because that's when you should.
Exactly. I was teaching a seminar the other day, and this just came to my head, but people got a kick out of me saying this. Said my mom, was a very good thrift shopper, and she shopped at Kmart's. And when the blue light came on, everybody knew that was a sale and ran to that. Well, when the blue light comes on in the stock market, everybody runs away.
Right. Which, the old Warren Buffett asset, right? Be fearful when others are greedy, and be greedy when others are fearful, right? So, so basically, it brings us to our fourth kind of main bullet point here: unhelpful behaviors, right? So we started off by saying, I told the little story about the lady who was watching the headlines constantly. It goes without saying, Jude, that's got to be, what do I need to stop doing right now? The number one has got to be turn off the news, right? It has to be.
Turn it off. Obviously I do this for a living, so I have to watch the news. But over the 2 days of when the tariffs were announced,
when they first came in,
I watched even more, and I thought to myself, oh my God, if you're just watching this without any understanding of historical norms, what's happened in the past, having a good financial plan, this stuff could drive you crazy, because everybody's got a take on it. And if you ask 5 different professionals what their opinion is on this, you're going to get 10 different opinions.
Oh, yeah.
So number one thing is turn off the news.
And it's not just the news anymore, right? Because we have these little things in our hands where we get constant stuff on them. And so doom scrolling, right? I don't know if you've heard that term or not, folks, but it's a thing, right? When you start looking at stuff on your phone and you just keep, going. Well, if you're looking up the negative, right? What's the phone going to do? The algorithm for whatever app you're using is going to send you more of the negative. Well, guess what? Now you're in a real spiral, right? And we've all heard this term now. Don't do that either.
Yep. And then the last thing I would say is don't panic. I mean, even if you don't have a financial plan, which we've been stressing today,
right?
Don't panic, because now is the most opportune time to see a professional that really understands what they're doing and can build something customized to your situation.
Yeah.
Don't feel guilty. Don't panic.
Yeah.
Take a breath and schedule time to see someone that really knows what they're doing.
Yeah, no permanent decisions during temporary fear, right? Bad move.
That.
Right?
I like that.
Yeah, it's a bad move. And I'll give you one more if you like that one, right? I think this is a great line. Because, when the markets are doing great, right? We've had several, bull runs in the last, number of years, right? We've had some pretty good, everybody's a genius, right? You throw a dart at the dartboard. Like you said, you could follow the Magnificent Seven for a number of years and everyone looks like a genius. When things are choppy, that's when discipline and consistency beats brilliance, right?
Absolutely. That's that old Mike Tyson quote. Everybody has a plan until they get in the ring. I think that's how it goes.
Until they get punched in the mouth.
So when you have a real plan and you have real strategy, it definitely outpaces luck.
Yeah.
And that's the thing.
Consistency too, right? I mean, back to the dollar cost averaging. Tried and true things when the markets are down. These are when those things become important.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's what's going to see you through the rocky times. And to be very straightforward, that's where people like myself, my team, other good advisors, that's really where they earn their most amount of their value. Because you're right. When the market's doing great, everybody feels that they're Warren Buffett. But
we're all geniuses.
But to have a coordinated plan that looks not only at your investments, looks at your taxation, looks at your estate plan, looks at your risk management, that is the solution for long-term success.
Yeah. And especially if you're younger, right? So if you're younger and you're panicking right now, definitely don't do that, because you got a long window. You got a long runway
Yeah.
If you're a little bit older, you're a little more gray. Okay, I get it, right? I get being nervous, but a strategy, all those different components that go in there, it's not just the portfolio and just the investments. There's definitely other things that make up this whole thing called, retirement planning and retirement strategy. So, as Jude said before, if it's not him, talk with someone, but certainly talk with a qualified professional. Don't just run out and take action from our podcast or Kramer or anybody else that you hear, right? Make sure that you see how it fits your unique situation. We got links in the show descriptions below to get yourself some time on Jude's calendar. If you'd like to have a conversation, you can find him online at a couple different websites. You can go to thetaxbomb.com. Great place to get some cool stuff running there. You can use the calculator for some things, or you could just go to his main website, which again, we got the links below. So you can book some time onto the calendar. We also have the number there for you to call. It's on the screen the whole time. So thanks for hanging out, Jude, and breaking it down. We always appreciate it, my friend.
Love it. Hopefully we gave some real value today.
Yeah, I hope so. Shared some useful nuggets of information along the way. As always, don't forget to subscribe to us on Apple or Spotify, or of course YouTube. Hit the thumbs up and the notification bell so you catch new episodes when they come out. Hit that subscribe button so that you catch new content as well. Supports the channel, and hopefully you learn a few things along the way. We'll see you next time here on The Roth Guy with Jude Wilson.
Financial planning and advisory services are offered through Prosperity Capital Advisors, PCA, an SEC-registered investment advisor with its principal place of business in the state of Ohio. Centrus Financial Strategies and PCA are separate, non-affiliated entities. PCA does not provide tax or legal advice. Insurance and tax services offered through Centrus Financial Strategies are not affiliated with PCA. Information received from this podcast should not be viewed as individual investment advice. Product discussions and illustrations are hypothetical in nature and will vary based on many factors, including but not limited to age, health, product, insurance carrier, and product design. You should consult the insurance carrier website and policy for detailed information. For information pertaining to the registration status of PCA, please contact the firm or refer to the Investment Advisor Public Disclosure website, www.advisorinfo.sec.gov. For additional information about PCA, including fees and services, send for our disclosure statement as set forth on Form ADV from PCA using the contact information herein. Please read the disclosure statement carefully before you invest or send money.